Hello, my name is Don Sull. I'm a professor at London Business School, and today we're going to talk about strategy and its discontents. Now, we all know the conventional wisdom on strategy. It's a very linear process. First you plan, then you implement your plan, and then you protect or sustain your competitive advantage long into the future. Now, this approach to strategy, very well entrenched in our thinking, has a lot of advantages. It clarifies where you're going, how you'll get there, what are the milestones along the way, whether you're doing well or not. A lot of advantages. And indeed, it appeals to many people's desire for control and for logic. It sounds good. There's one problem. It doesn't really work. And it doesn't really work, we've known for a while, it turns out. Basically, for 40 years, management scholars have been looking to see if they can find a link between linear planning and firm performance. And after 40 years of looking, they haven't found any, which suggests another 40 years they're unlikely to find it again. And so why would it be? It sounds so good in theory. It seems so sensible. Why wouldn't this linear view of strategy work? And the fundamental reason is this. It fails to incorporate new information and act on that. The plan is made in the beginning, at the very time, when you have the least information about how events will unfold that might influence that strategy. So the fundamental problem with this linear view of strategy, plan, implement, protect what you've got, is that it doesn't capture and use new information. Now that plays out in three very important ways. One, it is often the case that strategy is viewed as being separate from execution. The formulation is different from the execution. Now, that's in most business schools today, that's how strategy is taught. There's a class on strategy formulation, deciding what to do, and then a separate class on execution. The problem with this is very obvious, but very fundamental. Some of the most important information about a strategy, whether it's working or not, whether it needs revision or not, comes through execution. There are some information that you can only produce by executing. How will competitors respond? How will regulators respond? How will customers respond? What will happen with the technology? Can we scale the business model? There are a set of issues where information arises only through execution. So the first problem is separating execution from formulation of the strategy. The second problem is, and in some ways a more fundamental one, is that this linear view of strategy fuels people's tendency to escalate commitment to a failed course of action. Now, sociologists have documented in voluminous detail the tendency of people and groups of people and organizations to keep plowing ahead in a failed course of action, even as negative information continues to mount. The archetypical example historically has been Vietnam, the U.S. War in Vietnam. Unfortunately, we have a new example to work with these days. But the basic logic of this is as follows. The leader stands up and says, I have got this strategy and it is right. The leader kind of stakes his or her credibility on the strategy being right. And then they go into implementation. Well, if bad news comes in, it's too painful for them to admit that their strategy was wrong. They vested so much of themselves into it. And so as a result, any failure is either attributed to bad execution, which ignores, of course, this fact that execution and formulation are intimately interlinked, or unexpected surprises, which is just what silly people say when what they really mean is new information that we couldn't have expected, which we should have accounted for in the first place. So the second problem is it fuels this tendency to escalate commitment. And the third one is the most nuanced of all, and that is that it hinders good timing. Now, timing is an interesting issue. Doing the right thing at the right time is not something that's at the center of current strategic thinking. And yet everyone who lives in the real world understands that being right at the right time as opposed to a little bit too early or a little bit too late can be decisive. So how does this linear view of strategy inhibit timing? Well, the basic idea is this. Time doesn't exist in this story. It's some platonic world where you plan and then implement and then sustain long into the future. And when time does enter the picture, it tends to enter as raw speed. So you just rush through your plan as quickly as possible. Now, the problem with that is pretty simple. If you implement a flawed strategy fast, you're likely to get to the wrong place quicker than anybody else, which is not a desirable outcome. So instead of this atemporal view that just views time as raw speed, we need some kind of view that somehow chunks time up and helps us to improve our timing. Now, of course, strategists have recognized the challenges with this linear view of strategy for many years, and they've tried to accommodate them. One way they've tried to accommodate it is to say, listen, we know it's hard, but for the big decisions, we'll identify what matters up front. We'll think really, really hard about everything that could happen before we make that choice. Now, the problem is, again, simple there. It's hard to identify what matters beforehand, and it's hard to, I would argue, impossible to anticipate all the things that could happen, right? So a second approach has been diversification. We'll hedge our bets. Now, the literature on diversification is a mixed bag, but a lot of the evidence suggests that diversification can distract managers and keep the firm as a whole from succeeding. And more specifically, for any of the business units within a diversified portfolio, it doesn't help them. At the group level, it helps, but not at the business unit level. And some people have said, quite honestly, listen, it's a bit of a crapshoot. You choose your strategy, you roll the dice, you hope for the best. But again, that's not a very satisfying approach. So the question on the table is this. If this linear view of strategy, plan, implement, sustain, doesn't incorporate and act on new information, what can we use instead? And that will be the topic of our next podcast. Thank you.